It's a warm welcome to our program, and it's that time of the week again when we put Africa at the forefront and bring you news and views you won't get anywhere else. I'm Maroleng, and this is Africa 360. It's part 2 of our special on national competitiveness here on Africa 360. No longer a concept related to private business. Countries are now trying to position themselves as globally competitive, and Africa certainly wants to present itself as a new economic frontier. But what does this mean for ordinary citizens? Is competitiveness just another buzzword, or will it trickle down to bring real change? Stay with us as we unpack exactly what all this means for you right here on Africa 360. Competitiveness is a new buzz term that has become a favorite of many policymakers and economists who use it as a yardstick for measuring a country's performance. The aim is really to look at a nation like a business, to equip it to compete in the cutthroat global market while still providing for the needs of its citizens. But what does it take for an average person to thrive in a country that strives to be competitive? Africa 360's producer Lindsay Schutel finds out. Take a look.
Competitiveness. It's a new buzzword amongst policymakers, but how do we equip ordinary citizens to participate in a competitive economy? Meet Alan Plank, who has turned a simple manufacturing plant into a means to create entrepreneurship amongst dozens of new small business owners. His own company, Mobile Cold Rooms, began by hiring out cooling storage units. He has now expanded his operations to include mobile kitchens and even a custom-built cocktail bar. The aim is to empower smaller businesses by selling a trailer to start their own, and then progressing to independent food vendors and equipment hire. The convenience means running costs are low and infrastructure almost negligible. Customers in areas where access to electricity is difficult only need a generator to have their businesses up and running in minutes. The mobile solution has attracted customers from across the continent.
When I started, I didn't expect a guy in Lagos, Nigeria, to give me a call and asked me if I could produce him a trailer which he would term as a picnic bar trailer, and wanting to park it at the beachfront in Lagos and sell beverages from. And yes, and we've done that, and it's fantastic. The client is totally enthusiastic about it, and he wants to order more.
One of his customers is Andy Boshielo. Unable to find a mobile cold room to cater to his sister's wedding, he started his own business.
When I was searching for this type of a product, I sort of struggled to get one. And I sort of thought how many people out there who are going through the same frustrations as I am. So it would be good to sort of serve the communities out there.
The software developer now owns 3 cold rooms, which he rents to customers across South Africa as a second income.
We're living in times where the only certainty is uncertain, as they can put it. So relying on one source of income, for me, I found it very risky. So yeah, I think it's much important to start thinking along those lines as young South Africans to sort of get the mentality out of saying I want to go submit the CV to so-and-so and then get employed, and start taking the ownership, the initiative. There's always a niche, there's a gap wherever you are.
Plank, who began his business in air conditioning and solar heating, started the mobile business as an extra source of revenue. In less than a year, it has now become 60% of his income.
For me, it's a burning desire to see Africa work, to see South Africa work. We need to create employment. We need to create jobs for people. We need to create hope for people. And for me, it's not so much just wanting to make the money and do the job. It's to see a better place for my children.
Plank employs 18 people at his manufacturing plant, but his medium-sized enterprise has created at least 100 other micro-businesses. And as every trailer leaves, he insists on giving his customers a workshop on how to ensure their ventures remain competitive.
For me, it's not just the 100 trailers, but I see 100 micro businesses which have started, and that's what almost brings tears to my eyes every time a trailer goes out the door.
As politicians and economists wrangle over strategy and statistics, any country that wants to be competitive can't do so without engaged and enterprising citizens, and any policy on competitiveness must begin with the people. Lindsay Schutel, Johannesburg.
That was Lindsay Schutel reporting on what competitiveness means to the ordinary man. But moving on, in collaboration with South Africa's official marketing agency, Brand South Africa, Africa 360 recently hosted a roundtable discussion on the next 50 years of Pan-Africanism and African economic integration. Last week, we brought you the debate on what it means to be competitive. My guests were Ebrima Faal, Regional Director of the African Development Bank, Dr. Essop Pahad, who is the former minister in the South African presidency and now editor of the Thinker magazine, and chairperson of the NEPAD Business Foundation, Stanley Subramoney, was our other guest. And we're also joined by Kenya's High Commissioner to South Africa, Ambassador Patrick Wamoto. We talked about the role of tangibles such as skills development and infrastructure, but also the importance of governance, leadership, and a clear vision for the continent.
So clearly the issue around making sure that Africa does it for itself is important. One of the challenges we face, and it's a tragedy of the African continent, is that we are endowed with natural resources. But what we do is that we dig the dirt out of the ground, we send it to the ports, and then we import the finished product. So what we do is that we export wealth and we import poverty. We export jobs and we create unemployment.
In part two of this debate, we talked about the bread and butter issues of competitiveness and opened the floor for questions. And that is a question and answer session from our audience. Let's get straight into some of those questions.
I'm quite positive about Africa, but one of the dynamics I tend to find a bit perturbing when we discuss this role of Africa is our definitions. I mean, I'm happy GDP. Well, it's a great field. We all feel great about GDP. But what I never hear, and I find this a bit troubling, in the research that tends to come out of mostly westernized companies like Deloitte, is they focus so much on the 6% or the 8% that Africa is growing. But what does that say about how we want to define ourselves as Africans going forward? Where's the definition about how many graduates from engineering are we producing? How many scientists are we producing? And that's what I think is missing from this debate, where are the Africans saying, this is how we'd like to go forward?
Ebrima Faal, what is the vision for Africa? You know, we are tired of unsubstantiated questions and issues on Africa.
I mean, as I alluded to earlier, clearly Africa operates in an international financial architecture. You cannot separate yourself from that. That's where we are, that's where we have to operate. But what one has to look at is to go beyond headline headline GDP numbers, and say what is really happening behind those numbers. Is it inclusive, both in terms of geography, in terms of gender, across space? And the answer is no, it hasn't been. It has been mostly headline inflation. And when you look down, trickle down, and look at behind the numbers of how poverty have increased, how access to education, access to water and sanitation have increased, those variables have not increased at all. But we also look at it as a structural problem. Structural in the sense that you cannot have 54, excuse me, the word balkanized, but 54 economically balkanized states and then expect to have a competitive framework. There's no scale. You must have the economy of scale to be able to be competitive. But the solution is there. I think there's a vision now. There's political championing from the top. There's agreement on a common vision of what is the basic minimum infrastructure that needs to be developed for the continent to at least be able to start becoming competitive. It's a process, though it will take time.
How can we move forward to assert the greater control of our own resources and of our own development in the continent itself.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Africa 360. This week we're in conversation about how to make Africa globally competitive. At a recent roundtable debate held by Africa 360 in collaboration with Brand South Africa, we gave the audience the microphone and asked them to pose some tough questions to our panel. Let's see what they had to say about Africa's past, present and future. Take a look.
Just one question I have for the panelists. Africa belongs to some of the Africans who lives here. And some of the time when we look at it, the question always comes, do we own what Africa is? Or we have to wait to be told what Africa is? Who owns the IP? Who owns the resources? If ever we have to trade off in terms of development, infrastructure that we're talking about,
if you are so dependent on somebody else, what real powers do you have and what room for maneuver do you have? The sad truth is that there are many countries on our continent whose budget is dependent from the former colonial and imperial powers. 40 to 50% of their budget is dependent on getting aid from those countries. In quite a number of the French-speaking African countries, this is the truth. Now, if you are dependent for your budget to that extent on those countries, to what extent are you then in a position in which you can make independent decisions about your own country, about your own people, about your own region, about your own continent? So the question is a very relevant one in the sense to say, of course we own. But do we control? And I think the question must be, how can we move forward to assert the greater control of our own resources and of our own development in the continent itself?
Thank you, sir.
Minister Pahad, where are we? Politically thinking, where are we? ANC, ZANU, KANU, you name them all. Year in, year out, it's the same sort of concept. It's the same argument. This is where we are, we were colonized. This is where we are 20 years down the line. It's still the same issue, nothing moves. Next year, I'm going to cast a vote. There's ballot, there's voting in South Africa. Nothing changes. Should we sit here, engage in this fashion, but at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to take us anywhere?
I think it's a crucial question. Your country's gone through a dynamic change, transition after transition, and many other African countries face the same issue. Do we have a youth who will remain disenfranchised?
Well, I mean, certainly from where I come from, we are no longer mourning about we were colonized and so on and so forth. We are trying to transform our institutions. We are trying to restructure our economy. We are trying to empower our youth. We are trying to empower our women. We talked about education. I wanted to make a comment on the issue of education and how appropriate it should be. For instance, Kenya has defined itself as wanting to be an IT hub, the Silicon Savannah. What we are doing from next year, every kid in class 1 will have a laptop. That's a promise we've made in the new administration. Why? Because you can't be an innovator if you're exposed to computers at age 19 or 20. You must start from that basic age. So we are restructuring our education systems so that we focus more on those kind of training that will make our country competitive. We may make roads. If we don't have good engineers, we will not maintain them. We may make good railway lines. If we don't have good engineers, we will not maintain them. So those are the issues we are looking at. In terms of women, half of the world is women. And from research, no country has ever developed without taking women seriously. That is why in our new procurement regulations, 30% of government procurement is reserved for women and youth, so that women entrepreneurs can also take part, in this big, trading space. So those are the issues we are looking at. We are having our own internal debate. We are no longer mourning about the British colonized us and they took away our coffee and tea and all that. We are just having a debate. Of course, we started by ensuring that we have institutions. First of all, a constitution that addresses our needs. And then we are building from that, and we are very confident that by the year 2030, as per our vision, we will be a middle-income industrializing country. And we are focusing on infrastructure. We are not just looking at ourselves, and that's why the subject we're discussing is important. Integration, because we can never be competitive if we are looking at a small Kenyan market or South African market. In the East African community, we have doubled, in fact, we're almost trebling the trade figures since 2005 when we signed, we went into a customs union. And 2009, we got into a common market. So if you look at the trade figures, today Kenya is the second largest foreign investor in Tanzania. It's not the UK or the US or China. So those are the things that we're talking about, and they are real. So we have hard facts to prove that if you integrate, then you move forward, you become competitive, there's more trading space, you open up your economies, and you stop mourning about the past. And I think that's what the debate should focus on. We got to walk the talk. If we say we want to empower women, we must do it. If we say we must give our youth opportunities, we must do that.
Welcome back. This is Africa 360, and this week we're talking competitiveness. It's a term usually associated with private companies, but leaders and economists are turning this business concept into a national goal. In part two of our conversation with Brand South Africa and our esteemed panel of guests who joined us for this important conversation, and they included the Regional Director of the African Development Bank, Ebrima Faal, Dr. Essop Pahad, who is the former minister in the South African presidency and now editor of the Thinker magazine. And also joining us in that panel was the chairperson of the NEPAD Business Foundation, Stanley Subramoney, and last but not least, Kenya's High Commissioner to South Africa, Ambassador Patrick Wamoto. In this episode, our audience members asked what the role of women will be in the new economic era for Africa. And this is how our conversation went.
My question is based on the ladies, and I don't see any ladies on the panel. First things first, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, because you've kind of like half answered my question. From a South African perspective, we've been speaking and bringing out the whole women environment, and the private sector is not changing. Do we have a plan, a concrete plan that even as black women, when we walk out of here, we say, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to break it. This is how we're going to sit on those boards. Is there any concrete plan? Because I think for 20 years we've been speaking, we've been in the marketplace, and we have not seen any changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In actual fact, I'm going to break with protocol here because you're all chauvinists here. And I'm going to go to the chairperson of Brand South Africa and ask her to essentially address that question here about what is the space that is provided for women in terms of economic development. Here's the mic, ma'am.
Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. Sitting here thinking, I'm chairman of Brand South Africa. That's something. No, but I think let's not, a lot has been achieved, but a lot more still needs to be done. There are plans in government, for instance, many of the ministers are female. We've made strides in the corporate sector in terms of breaking the walls, but there is still a lot that should be done in terms of recognizing and institutionalizing the structures that recognize women as contributors of content, not only as a ticking of the box to say we have women in senior executives, but also giving women the responsibility that comes with it. The Business Women's Association and many other such organizations are engaging business and are engaging government to make sure that the talk that we hear in platforms like this are not just talk, but they become actually implementable strategies, and they become implementable projects where we can measure and see how are we progressing. We all know that without women, we will not move forward, and it has been said here many a times. But I think we need to hold accountable and not have a fuzzy, warm-feeling discussion to say women should get involved, women should be recognized. And that's where the discussion perhaps should go in terms of engaging business and saying to business, private sector, what are you doing in terms of institutionalizing the recognition of women and making sure that you are held accountable, whether it's in part of your reporting or it's in whatever form, but that needs to happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time for the engagement, and it's a pity because I was enjoying the trajectory of our conversation because it was getting us to the point of this whole debate, which is really around Pan-Africanism and African integration. We've touched on a number of questions around this. So I'd like to call upon our panel in exactly 1 minute and a half. 1 minute and a half, each of you, to give us a sense of where you see Pan-Africanism, African integration, and indeed Africa's competitiveness going in the year 2063, which is in about 50 years' time, as we celebrate Africa's 50th anniversary of this institutionalized form of Pan-Africanism in the Organization of African Unity, and of course, its successor, the AU. And I'll start with you, Ambassador.
Mine is very simple. We got to walk the talk. If we say we want to empower women, we must do it. If we say we must give our youth opportunities, we must do that. If we say we bring down the barriers to trade, we must do it. So we must integrate. That is the answer.
Short, sharp, and to the point. Sir.
I think the time has come to move beyond the talk and into implementation. Africa has 54 countries. You've got states within states. You've got unviable states. I think the road to 2063 and beyond will need one simple thing, and that's leadership. Leadership to take us out of this current position and, as Dr. Pahad said, into a giant leap forward. It can be done. It has been done. And certainly, if we're sitting here in 2063, reflecting on the past, I think we'll sit here with a smile and said, Africa has arrived.
Africa has arrived. Yeah. Dr. Pahad, have we?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid for Subramoney that almost all of us will be dead by 2063. So we can say what we want, and nobody will hold us responsible for what we say. I think critically important, Subramoney has spoken 3 times about this thing, and so has Ebrima. There are 54 African countries. Critically important as we go ahead is that each of our countries will have to be ready and committed to surrendering their own sovereignty around many issues. If you don't surrender your sovereignty and you keep on thinking, I must do things for myself or for my own country, for my own people, we will not advance. So we have to be in a position where we say we are ready now to surrender our sovereignty to a much bigger project. And I think that is critically important. And nobody will be around, but you put it on your Africa 360, 50 years time, they can find it.
For future generations, for posterity. Mr. Ebrima Faal.
Yeah, and I think, all have been said, except I think Africa must take control of its own agenda. And I think that's happening. I think there's leadership at the continental level now, through the AU, through eNCA, and then through the AFDB. And the second part of that is that we must be able to finance and raise our own domestic resources through innovative instruments to be able to finance our own development. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed our focus on competitiveness, that is Africa's competitive advantage or comparative advantage in relation to the rest of the globe. But what emerges from our conversation is that it's becoming increasingly clear that for competitiveness to bring real change, it needs to be driven by, amongst other things, entrepreneurial citizens aided by governments who have the political will to create the environments that are able that enable African citizens to harness that competitive advantage. It's the last of our two-part series of specials on competitiveness, but the conversation is certainly not over. You can join the debate by liking our Facebook page, or you can tweet us your views at Africa360_eNCA. You can always send us an email at africa360@enca.com. So until next time, when we look forward to bringing you a more competitive Africa like you've never seen it before, do take care.